The Reaver Titan, the 4th largest and 4th most expensive model Games Workshop has ever made. For those who have one, they reported is 7 pounds heavy and 16 inches tall. To get to this moment, I painted a Warhound, traded it for a Reaver, argued with the post office for 10 months, and now it's finally time to build one of my all-time favorite models. And I'm gonna do it in one day. No, it's not part of it. That is not at all part of it. Every part comes with giant resin gates that all need to be carved away. And because of their size, most of them need to be sawed off. Just this alone took hours. It's not even the prepping, it's the prepping to prep the model. It's quite an experience. On the Games Workshop web store, it says this kit is for ages 15 and up. Nope, this is for die-hard, experienced Warhammer fans. I was a weird 15-year-old putting LiPo batteries into my Nerf guns and hanging drywall, and I can't imagine tackling a model kit like this. The size of these parts are staggering, dwarfing some of the bigger models in my Games Workshop collection. Every part was a little messed up and needed sanding and filing to get it to be correct. Hours later, I had a big mess and all the parts ready. I am completely covered in resin dust, but actually it wasn't that bad. And I discovered that about half of this kit is resin gates. But now that I've made a big old mess, it is time to get nice and clean. Now this really demonstrates why resin is a garbage material for humongous miniatures, because you actually have to clean every single piece. Forge World suggests to use an abrasive cleaner. They suggest washing up liquid. So I have some less toil. This is gonna be my soak station. They're all gonna get a turn in the ultrasonic cleaner, and then they're gonna move on to the rinse station. And then I get to start putting it all together.
Less soil, liquid detergent, modern as day, there's less toil with less soil, so clean the less soil way. Use it for your laundry or your painted walls, floors or woodwork, anything at all. Wash away dirt or grease and oil, it's so easy when you use less soil.
Every single part has been washed, and it wasn't too bad. It took a lot of time, but now I feel like I really understand the kit. And I feel like it's a really good sign that the water looks super nasty. So hopefully I got all that mold release agent off. And now, like 8 hours into the process, I can finally start putting it together. Now, one of the things I'm really worried about is weight. This thing weighs almost as much as my dog, and it's a gaming miniature, so I want to try to get rid of as much weight as possible through the power of heavy machinery. A lot of these parts are solid resin. The missile launcher is probably the worst offender. It weighs about 1 pound and sitting right at the tippy top. And I don't want this thing tippy, so I started slapping holes in it. The missile tubes were easy. I just made half of them empty. Then I turned it around and drilled out as much as I could. There's an exhaust back there that'll hide this. And the guns were easy too. Typically when drilling gun barrels, I go about 2 or 3 millimeters deep. On these, I went all the way through. I could use these as drinking straws. On the body sections, these butt up against each other, so I can turn them into Swiss cheese. Every little bit'll help. I want a game with this sucker, and if it doesn't weigh as much as a bowling ball, I might be able to travel with it. Even with all this material I'm sucking out of there, it's still only a few ounces. I think it's helping. I definitely don't want a top-heavy Titan, but we'll see. Now it's time to finally start building this sucker. The problem with resin Titans is that they do not want to be built. Gravity is working against me, and I don't trust super glue for these giant parts. I mixed up epoxy resin. And speaking of they don't want to be built, nothing fit together. I had to heat up the parts to make them soft, then press, shove, and hammer them into place, and then clamp them until they were dry. And the last nail in the coffin is the instructions. There might as well not be instructions. Black and white photos, clearly printed off of a consumer printer. What did I expect for 1,400 bucks? I'm thinking about what pose I want to go with. The legs are so cool, I really want to show off the mechanics of them, with one planted and one stepping. The thigh is a giant piston, so for the stepping leg, I sawed off about 1 inch and glued them together. This compression will give me more room to pose. I glued his hip bone into the leg with a 2mm brass rod pin. This will give me some more shear strength. On his beautiful bug face, the top didn't fit well onto the bottom, so I heated up some water and gave the head a soak. This softens the resin all the way through. Then I took the helmet and pressed it hard onto the head. As the resin cooled off, it stiffened and now it fits perfectly. I want the inside of the head to be accessible, so you can see the Princept and his co-pilots. So I sunk in some magnets onto the head and it clacked down with an incredibly satisfying click. I was a little worried about the face tubes, they seemed like a point of failure, so I decided to sink them in with some 2mm brass rod pins. And speaking of points of failure, let me introduce you to the disaster that is these legs. Each foot is exactly 27 parts, and none of them fit snugly or tightly. They are all loosey-goosey ball joints. This is where the Titan is going to be under the most stress, so I want to use as much epoxy as I can. The ankle piston goes into the knuckle armor goes into the toe hydraulics go into the toe, and the toe goes into the foot pad. I absolutely love the engineering that has gone into these feet, and it is an absolute nightmare to put it all together. On the body, I stuck it together with threaded rod, drilling holes that are a little too small for it and then using it as a really long screw through the resin. I decided I don't really care about the interior. It's really cramped and hard to see inside, so I'm saving all those parts, maybe for a diorama later. And you know what? It would look really good in a Cobalt Keep display case. Not only does Cobalt Keep make the best quality miniature bases in all the sizes Wargamers need, but they also make the best display cases around. Their Hero display case holds one prized miniature with a metal plate in the bottom so you don't have to worry about magnet polarity, and it holds the mini very securely. The box is stacked so you can display all your most prized minis in your collection. Cobalt Keep's army display case is designed to hold the bulk of an army for tabletop war games, with a floor made out of a metal plate so your models will be held securely no matter where they're placed in the case. Why not display your miniatures and transport them all at once? The high quality polycarbonate shell securely clips into place and your minis are ready to be transported or displayed in style. So all this looks great, but you need something bigger? Well, Cobalt Keep has you covered. Their cavalry cases are monstrous, perfect for holding large cavalry minis and actual monsters, or any other centerpiece model in your collection. If you want to pick up some of these magnet display cases and show off your minis in style, you can shop with the code EOB10 to get 10% off your order of Cobalt Keep cases. A big thanks to Cobalt Keep for sponsoring this video. My Titan interior will be better displayed here than under pounds of resin. Trimming the metal threaded rod made a lot of metal dust that is really stuck on there, so I used a magnet to get it off. And the Titan comes with a lot of fancy extras. To me, the Titan is already fancy enough, so I decided to leave most of them off except for the Titan symbol. I sanded it flat until it fell away from the sprue and then glued it right onto his dick armor. This is by far the hardest kit I have ever tried to put together. It has been 20 hours of fussing with it. Unwarping stuff, sanding stuff, epoxying stuff. It is an incredibly difficult kit. But I do have all of the parts put together, and now it is time to get this guy onto a base and posed up. And I don't have a good way of doing that, so it's just gonna be real dumb brute force. Now for 1,400 bucks, Forge World does not supply this model with a base, so I am left to my own devices. I have this lovely piece of oak, and I already have a pose in mind. I want a nice marching forward look. And I want to see how small of a base I can make while still getting everything I want out of the pose. I want him really lifting the leg. He is not afraid to point the toe. I covered my wood in tape so I don't mess it up and marked out his feet. I want an oval base. Games Workshop makes up to a size 170mm. Mine will be just a little bit bigger than 330mm. I drew out a rough oval and then refined it with a ruler to get it nice and even. I softened the edges and carved away the tape so I had a nice edge to show me exactly where to cut. That's my base! And all I have to do is cut it out. And the only tool I have to cut it out is this. This was brutally hard, but working slowly and steadily, I hacked it into shape. Yeah, that is not too shabby. Now comes the real hard part, figuring out how to get this guy attached. And not permanently, because I want him in a lot of parts so that I can paint him. So I gotta come up with some ways to not permanently, but very perfectly keep him trapped on this base. I traced out where his leg would go for the last time, and I need to know where his hip is gonna be. So his leg has to get attached. I put 4 dots of paint onto the joint and then put 4 small balls of poster putty on. This connection isn't super tight, so I need spacers. I squished them together, and now I know exactly where these spots line up. I drilled out some holes and inserted brass pegs. It's not perfect, so I made the pegs into points and then shoved the leg parts together. I put a little super glue on his foot and stuck it down to the wood. This isn't permanent, I just need it stuck on so I can flip the base upside down and attack the leg from underneath. I used super strong magnets to show me where his foot was on the other side of the base, then I drilled up through the wood, through his foot and about 3 inches into his leg. Then I pried him off. I used a piece of brass rod to check how deep the hole was and then cut myself a length of threaded rod. I clamped this down into my drill's jaws and slowly screwed up into the leg. It was a little tricky getting it off, but now I have a super strong bolt. And that bolt needs a nut. I made the hole through the base bigger and then drilled out a space for the nut to live in. I stuck the Titan through the hole, attached a washer and nut, and then I used a wrench to tighten it down. Pun intended. Oh yeah, that is strong. It might be too strong. I'm very nervous about the structural integrity of this thing. But now that one foot's on, this next foot is kind of floating, so I think the next step is actually going to be to attach his butt. I want to leave this Titan in as many pieces as possible to make painting easier, but I need him assembled to get the pose and structure right. I drilled a hole through his hip and inserted some more threaded rod. This will hold up his entire body, so I needed to run through both legs. I cut it down to length and made up a puddle of epoxy that I lathered onto his butt and then I threaded it into place. This is 6-minute epoxy, so I threw a level on top and held it for 6 minutes while it cured. Now I drilled a matching hole in the other leg, using a drill bit the exact right size for the rod. This leg will slide on instead of screwing on. The rod will take the weight, and when it's finally done, I can put epoxy in the joints. Now I need the stepping foot to stand. It hovers over the base, so I glued some scrap wood to the base and onto the foot to keep it in place, and then just like the last foot, I drilled up from underneath. Unfortunately, this bolt is going to be visible. I was thinking of hiding it in the toe, but it needs the strength of attaching it to the leg. I'll have to come up with something later to hide this. Maybe a bush. I put a nut under the base and another nut on top to clamp it to the wood, and then with a little wrenching, he was attached. He's walking! He's walking! And it is strong. Super happy with that. And now comes the fun part. Now that his lower half is rock solid, it's gonna be simple to get the top situated. I glued his shoulders, his body, the brick his arms are attached to onto his belly, using a level to get it just right. Then I drilled a hole all the way through and sunk in some more rod. I don't know why, this is just kind of funny to me. I made a corresponding hole in his body, and now to get the rod situated. I flipped him onto his back, and then I put a big hole in his butt. I'm bolting him together, and this bolt will be hidden by his under armor, which is the armor that goes over his butt. I ratcheted it down, and now he's standing. I'm so glad I'm not worried about the interior because it's making it really easy. I can hide all the hardware I want in his belly and make all of these connections rock solid. Now it's time for the reason to own a Titan, the guns. And although I only have 2 arm guns and no budget to get any more, I do want the option. I sunk huge magnets into the hands and into the guns. This is why it was so important to build them right, so I can get these guns posed exactly how I want, firing down at the enemy that has absolutely no chance. I filled up his shoulders with epoxy and squished the guns into position, holding them still for 6 minutes, waiting for the epoxy to set up. Now this epoxy is really strong, but I don't want to take any chances. I drilled holes and inserted more threaded rod through everything. This Titan will crack in half before any of these joints break. He is all built. Nothing is glued, but he is still decently solid. It is glorious. It is incredible. I remember seeing this guy on the Games Workshop web store in like 2011 and just not even thinking about it. Not even thinking about one day having one of these, just being like, that's pretty cool. But now it's here, and all it needs is really cool base. I kind of wish I had a little bit more room on this base. It is a monstrous base, but there's not a ton of places to put things. So I think instead of building up, I actually want to carve down into the wood. I sharpied out where I want some ditches to exist on the base, and then I took the feet off. It feels bad to take them apart moments after getting them all together. I broke out the router and started hacking away at the base. I did this over and over, dropping the depth of the router little by little until I had my holes. I am never gonna get all the sawdust out of this basement. And this base is feeling a lot lighter. I'm probably gonna be adding a lot of that weight back on with all the stuff I wanna put on top, but it's coming along. It kind of reminds me of landscape surveys from architecture school. It's kind of fun. I would definitely get a failing grade for this work, but I'm gonna turn it around. I made up some Bondo. This is another epoxy product that dries in 15 minutes. I use this to soften my edges so they look more natural and less like steps. Now I have all this room to play with. Remember the Daredeo Dreadnought video? I can finally use the rest of that Sentinel I bought back in 9th edition. I added some battle damage, taking a drill bit and making a dimple, putting plastic putty in the hole and then giving it a squish. This makes it look like a proper impact. Then I stuck him down, squishing him into some milliput. I am using so many 2-part epoxies. I used more milliput to smooth out the base, making some blast craters and small hills around the Titan's feet. I really like that down Sentinel, and having all this wet milliput on the base has given me an idea. Maybe I can do a little more storytelling. My Titan is a loyalist, and where there are Titans, there is the guard. I took some legs and made 100 footprints. This Titan is falling behind a 1,000,000-man guardsman charge. Everywhere else on the base, I put some texture paint. I want a muddy battlefield, and eventually, I want to do a resin pour on those ditches. I went through the Cadian shock trooper sprue and found some guys and gals that could pass for dead. I glued them here and there on the base, and one of these guardsmen is still kicking, having crawled up next to the Sentinel for cover. With my casualties in place, I sprinkled around some more bits like sandbags and jerry cans. I smeared Elmer's glue here and there to add some larger rocks around the craters and sprinkled on some sand, which I locked down with a spritzing of watery Elmer's glue. Kind of a simpler base. I didn't want to put any like destroyed rhinos or buildings on here because I didn't want anything to take away from the Titanic Reaver Titan. And it feels pretty good to have some deceased guardsmen on there because I have been playing Sean over and over and over with his Imperial Guard, and I'm about 0 for 20 in terms of wins, so it feels good to at least destroy some Imperial Guard on the painting table. And speaking of the painting table, once this base is dry, I can put the Titan back together, and then I will officially have a Reaver. My little god machine, he's all done. I feel like I made really good time on this guy. 50 hours to get him from forge rolled baggy to complete god machine. And I need your guys' help. I wanted some ideas of what I could freehand on here. It's gonna be Sutravora with the hot rod flames, but it's a gigantic canvas to work on. A friend of mine gave me a really good idea, doves. Doves could be really funny, the universal symbol of peace on an engine of war. And so I want a lot of little ideas like that of what I could do to spice him up. Big thanks to Cobalt Keep for helping make this guy a reality. And as always, thanks for watching.